Hello there. So I'm going to talk about exactly what is happening in just one city, for example, regarding shelters, sanctuary cities and their shelters. I am a conservative Republican, but I am on the lean right, if you will. I don't worship somebody who is in office. I look at any president, regardless of what their party is, if you will, on every single thing that they do. Right? That's how I hope and pray that every voting American would do, whether you vote or not. I wish that every person would not worship who they vote for or who they think should be in office, but to evaluate everything that they do for right or wrong. Right? So we were told, if you've anybody's paid attention, that the border czar Homan, he was border czar before when Trump was in office for 4 years. And one thing that I've noticed is a pattern of saying that it is illegal for sanctuary cities to be sanctuary cities. So if you're housing illegal people, people who, what I consider illegal is somebody who snuck in, did not go through ports of entry, did not come in under a program that they were allowed to come in as refugee status or whatever. That's what, in my mind, an illegal person is. That's a danger to our nation. Whether people agree with that or not is between them and God. But here's what's happening in New York. So they've got these shelters being torn down or closing or whatever, but then they're just opening new ones. Yeah, they're just opening up new ones and upsetting a lot of people. Like, why are you just all of a sudden you're opening this sanctuary city? Now, the interesting thing, though, there's a shift and there's a change with the shelters in New York, for example. They cannot be eligible for specific programs that they were eligible for before because a lot of that's been shut down, right? So they have to literally register for that shelter as an illegal resident or illegal person, an illegal, basically. No, I don't what the actual word is, but that pretty much identifies them as somebody who's not here under a refugee program. So if you're somebody, say for example, on the right that thinks, oh, okay, well, we're going to go and we're going to arrest everybody that's illegal. And there's a lot of different varying positions within the Republican Party who, like, they just really wanted the dangerous people out, you know? But then there's, like, racist people, even though they're a small amount of the Republican Party, they're just, like, I think they just hate immigrants, really, you know? But, this, which to me, you know, is kind of ironic. My ancestors are Native American, so I kind of just think that whole... Anywho's, well, long story, I'm not going to go there. So the idea that they're going to allow sanctuary cities. Now, there's a lot of smack talk, is what I call it, when you're a lot of hated, you know. I think Homan's legit. I think he is really believing in what he's doing. He is all about making our country safe and not misuse funds and to respect our laws. And if it says that if you come in, you sneak in, and you don't come in through ports of entry, you don't allow our nation to vet you to see if you're a safe person or not, then you have committed a crime. And I support that ideology, right? I'm also compassionate that, you know, we need to be respectful for those who are coming from countries that they really need refugee status. And we need to clean up this mess of people coming in not really needing refugee status. They're just they're wanting to immigrate to America, and they don't need refugee status. But not to put all the refugees in that box. And those who really need refugee status have been treated, I feel, unfairly because they're being boxed in. Not to everybody, but to a lot of people as, you know, is it their fault if the president illegally creates a refugee program outside the federal statutes on how refugee programs are created for specific countries via congressional vote? Because literally Trump just did the exact same thing. He literally just created a refugee program without congressional vote. And yet, he's like complaining that Biden did that. I don't think any president should do that. I think that should be a congressional vote. And there's funds that were appropriated for specific refugee programs, such as Haiti, such as Salvador, Ukraine, a lot of different countries. Okay? And we should not disturb that. Like, if Congress comes together and they present what needs to be presented to them on why a certain group of people need refugee status, we have 33 conflicts around the world. But what they're doing in New York, okay, when I see them saying that it's illegal to house, then let me show you. This is an article from back in 2018. They've been saying the same thing. It's a felony to knowingly harbor or conceal an illegal immigrant from immigration authorities. Don't test us. And he said that many times. You can go and dig out many articles where Homan was like, we'll prosecute you. We'll prosecute you. We'll prosecute you. Don't mess with us. We'll prosecute you. Because what you're doing is criminal. Then why are there still states with sanctuary cities? They keep talking smack, keep making threats against them. That's to put a show on for the voters. And in reality, look what's happening in New York. They're just shifting the shelters that are being closed down. And they're literally, well, according to those who have covered the story in New York, are registering as illegal immigrants. Basically saying they're undocumented. They're not here on any refugee program. Okay? And now whether or not they show the date that they entered the country, I don't know. I haven't actually seen the paperwork. But the fact of the matter is, they're literally just opening new shelters. And why wouldn't ICE just go in there and just arrest them and then arrest the people who's creating these sanctuaries? Because, I'll tell you why. Because it's a lie. His threats to prosecute those for felonies of creating these sanctuary shelters is empty. It's empty. And this went on during 2018. Not one person was ever prosecuted. And also, for the 4 years Trump was in office, okay, not one person was prosecuted for housing sanctuary cities. And then you had Biden in office for 4 long years, and he allowed them to come in by the millions, even though there's a yearly cap on how many people can apply for refugee status. And it's established by Congress, and it's by federal statute that they can, create a amount of people who can come in and ask for refugee or asylum status. And that was violated. And nobody filed in court an injunction to immediately stop the violation of that law. Not one Republican did that. Nobody stopped these people who, according to Homan, is committing a felony of harboring illegal people. Like, nobody. So why do they keep saying the same lies over and over? Why? Here we go. Here's an article from 2018. Again, threatening to prosecute officials of sanctuary cities is unconstitutional, they said. But is it? So if they fought and won that is unconstitutional, then why would they use that same statement that they're going to prosecute them if it was proven in court that's unconstitutional? Or if they found that it was not unconstitutional, then why was nobody ever prosecuted? Either way, it's a problem. They made the threats, okay, and then their threats was challenged, and yet they continue to make such threats. So what happened in that case? The threats were endless, according to ACLU, over and over and over. I think that they should have been prosecuted. I see the federal law that they're quoting, and it is unlawful. Okay? So, but here's what happened. They threatened to take away federal funding. Instead of prosecuting them, why don't they just prosecute them? Okay, so the argument is that the point of sanctuary policies is non-participation. That the local police and those do not have to participate in deportations with ICE. But if they're using money to house them, or what about the shelters, the who owns the shelters themselves? If you're taking public property and you're using it with taxpayers' money to house somebody that is harboring them. So why? Why is there no prosecution? The arguments against withholding federal funds was always linked up with other things. You know, you have to look into each one of those cases. But why was there never any prosecution? Ask yourself that. Well, in case you were wondering, what happened with those cases, it did go to the United States Supreme Court under Biden. But the split of the lower courts, because there was blocking of Trump's executive orders of withholding federal funds, there was a split within the circuit and district courts. And so that split remains. The justice's dismissal of the cases means the Supreme Court will not resolve a split in the lower federal courts over whether his fund withholding policy was lawful. So now is the time to arrest anybody managing the sanctuary shelters. Now is the time to get it back before the Supreme Court to resolve. Because even though there was courts that, you know, in certain regions, wherever those courts are, if it's a circuit court, and whatever states are under that circuit court, if that remains, the blocking of withholding of funds, then they can't withhold funds. Of course they can, and they will, or they could, and then they could take it up and say, hey, you know, the judge will say, hey, you know, if it's still the same judge, they will say, hey, you know, we've resolved this, at least in our circuit, and you can't do this in our region, right? And then they can take it back to the Supreme Court. But they can arrest people who are managing the sanctuary city shelters, because they're just closing some and opening new ones. But what's happening, this is one of the reasons why he got a lot of voters, the lean voters, the hardcore voters, is that he's going to aggressively enforce immigration laws in sanctuary cities and prosecution of officials who knowingly harbor undocumented immigrants. But they're not. Instead, bizarrely, they protected the mayor of New York, who was largely involved in much corruption and also in leading the nightmare mess of use of illegal residents and monies. Why are they protecting him? So, according to this status of the 7.8 million, they call them illegals, these are the amount of people who came in avoiding ports of entry. We're not talking about coming in through refugee programs, okay, to make this distinction here of who they're talking about, who are in the United States on the radar of federal immigration officials. 662,586 of those people are convicted felons or have criminal charges pending. And these are the people that they were focusing on mostly in their campaign, although they did say they're going to start with them, okay? And yet you have sanctuary cities, people just blatantly disregarding their threats to prosecute, and now they're literally opening new shelters in New York City and upsetting many of the residents, and they're literally not even there under refugee programs anymore because a lot of those have been canceled. So now they're just blatantly there being housed on the taxpayers' money and opening those, freaking people out in the neighborhoods. And they have this new rule as of March 12, 2025, said that undocumented migrants and many Canadians, shame on you, Trump, leave the Canadians alone, in the United States will be required to register. Let me sidestep that comment about Canada. The issue I have with Trump in Canada is that you name one thing that Canada was not doing that they're doing now when Trump was in office for 4 years. Everything they're doing now, they were doing then. And why didn't he just go and talk to them and say, hey, this is what I want to change so that we can avoid problems, right? Everything they were doing then, and when he was in office before, they're doing now. Anyways, moving right along. And interestingly, the number of 11 million people are here without legal status, that number has shrunk to almost in half to what he was basically stating. If you go back and listen to the videos from back in the summer during his campaign, it was 20 million people. Now it's 11 million people? What's happening there? So in actuality, having the United States Supreme Court not hear about, their movement from back when he was in office before to make threats against any of the officials in those specific circuit states is actually a violation of the federal court orders and rulings of those judges. And, well, the United States Supreme Court refused to take up those cases, although there were dissenting justices. There was only like 2 that I know of. So even conservative justices shot them down. They did have a win in the Second Circuit, but they've lost decisions on courthouse arrests also. And this is where I say the problem. Sometimes I wonder if they're just dive casing things. What I consider a dive case is when you fight in a way that it's set up to lose. For example, one way to settle this once and for all is to actually follow through on the threat to arrest. Arrest the person managing the shelters of illegal people for the act of the violation of the federal statute that clearly says harboring a person who entered illegally. And then you take it and you fight it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Because the cases going before are really the ones about funding, right? And here's the problem with the funding. These sanctuary cities combine their funding with special protected groups. I'll just leave it at that. So they combine them with these shelters. In case you didn't know, it's not just the illegals in the shelter. There's specific protected groups, okay, that are actually protected, that's basically combined in there. So if they attack the shelters, then they're attacking the funding for those groups also, you see. So if they just arrest them, not for the shelter itself, because of the protected people that also fall under the shelter, but just go in and arrest the persons managing the shelters, whoever they are, for housing illegal, violating of that federal statute. And then if they don't win that in their federal case, take it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, right? But they don't. Why not?